Hello and welcome to another episode of Bare Bones Wargaming, a show with no bells, no whistles, no frills, just a man, a camera, and his game. Little different episode here today. This episode I've decided that what I'm going to do is kind of talk in depth about a game, something I really haven't done a whole lot here in the past. Now, as most of you know from my unboxing video, I'm working my way through the World in Flames rulebook. I'm up to page 33 of 77, I think. So it's getting there. It's getting there. I have to admit, it seems very interesting. The naval combat is intriguing. We'll see how it goes in reality, so to speak. You know, theory and practice sort of thing. But right now I'm intrigued and looking forward to it. While I've been doing that, I've been going back and playing some of my favorite games that I enjoy quite a bit. Prior to what you see in front of you, which most of you realize probably is Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga, I was playing Crete 1941, which was one of my top games of the decade, number 2. And actually, this game just missed out. This finished at number 12 on my list when I was making my top 10 list. Just missing out, along with number 11, which was the Midway Solitaire game from World at War magazine. So I just finished another play of this game, which, just to refresh everybody, is Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga by Vento Nuovo Games. Came out last year, August, right around the time the Battle of Stalingrad began, around August 23rd, as I recall, off the top of my head. So, what I thought I would do with this episode is, I was going to do a little discussion about this game and some analysis, because there's been a lot of discussion, debate about this game, different commentary and such. So I thought I'd give my 2 cents on it, because again, this is now my 20th play, and I enjoy it quite a bit. Obviously, I mean, to me, when you get a game that ends up with 20 or more plays, you're kind of really getting into elite status there. So what I'm going to do with this video is talk a little in depth about the designer's way of playing here, okay, and talk about the normal level. Now, before you start to play, which I've done this, I had my 2 clunker plays at the beginning. I had 2 plays where I kind of was learning the game, and then I started doing this right away, because it just makes the game, each game different and more interesting, increases the replayability, etc. So before each game, you roll a die for each side, and then you roll to see how many of these 6 advantages, and I'm saying advantages for reasons that you'll see here in a minute, and then you find out which one of them. So, like example, my last game here, I rolled a 4 for the Germans, and I got Paulus, Hoth, von Richthofen, and 6th Panzer. And then you execute what those items do for you at the beginning of the game to set the table, so to speak. So I'm going to go through each one of these here on both sides, talk about them a little bit of analysis and such, particularly if you've been on the fence about this game. This might help a little bit because, of course, one of the big things, especially with the solitaire game, is replayability. You need to know that, you're going to get a unique experience each and every time you play. And I have to say, this last game here, my 20th, was interesting because it was the first time ever before, toward the end of the game, that I was actually able to knock out Spawning Hex 13 very, very early. This was quite a nail-biter of a game, waiting for that OKH card to come out, which thankfully never did. More about that here in a minute. So, we're going to start on the German side. And just like I said, we're just going to talk a little bit about each one of these items, what it does, and, pluses and minuses of it, and some thoughts about it, okay? And of course, in the comments, you can go ahead and chime in your own 2 cents on each one of these, or the whole thing if you want. That's up to you. And then after I do the German and the Russian side, I'm going to wrap up this video with a few thoughts, overall thoughts about different aspects of the game. So, here we go. So first of all, the first German item that can come up here for the setup, and let me zoom in here a little bit on the map. There we go. You can start the game with von Paulus. Now, with Paulus here, if you start the game, basically when he comes out of the deck in a normal game, you end up being able to pull 2 cards off the deck every time instead of 1. So when you capture a spawning hex or you call for reinforcements, you get to pull 2. Now, it's nice at the beginning because when you capture those spawning hexes early, or when you call for reinforcements right away, you're getting 2 cards, which of course means, you know, extra equipment and extra support that you might need, especially if it's in tandem with, say, von Richthofen, who comes out early and really makes the German Luftwaffe lethal. Now, von Richthofen, of course, was a commander of the unit in the German Luftwaffe that was the best trained at close air support tactics in the entire German armed forces. So it's good, of course, but the only problem is the OKH card. When that one comes out, if you end up drawing that early because you're drawing 2 cards instead of 1 every time when you need to, then you're really going to need him, because you're going to need that extra equipment, because then you have to basically secure the entire riverbank of the Volga or wipe out every Russian unit on the map. I've never tried the latter strategy because that just seems insane. To quote my friend Dave, who I used to play tournament chess with, when we would analyze games after a round, we'd be looking at moves and stuff, and if somebody made a move that was like questionable or dubious, his response always after the move was, "He's out of his mind!" And that's kind of what I feel about trying to kill every Russian unit on the map. You must be crazy. Alright? So, Paulus is an advantage that I think overall is better for the German to have at the beginning, because if you do pull the OKH card early, then at least you know you're up against it. And you know, dude, I got to secure every single hex on the riverbank. But at the same time, you might be pushing things along that you don't need. So that's Paulus there. Okay. Now, another advantage, another German setup situation, could be to get General Hoth early. Now, Hoth is helpful for clear hexes. And he's also extremely helpful for, let me zoom back out here, securing the edge hexes here. Okay, so way over here, hex 3, and then way over here, at the other end of the riverbank, hex 19, he's useful because there's a lot of clear hexes there. But the problem with the situation, of course, if you know anything about the geography and topography of Stalingrad, is there's not a whole lot of clear terrain. You know, have all those deep ravines and stuff, and I can't remember the Russian word off the top of my head for them, but you've got all those running towards the Volga that were just, you know, a pain in the dupa for the Germans, and of course, you know, good for the Russians because they can infiltrate troops through and run through and things like that. But he's good at the beginning for that dash, for that quick, you know, move. The combined arms, if you have them, you can go ahead and you get to shoot first in clear terrain. But to me, this is probably one of the weakest starting things that the Germans can get, because it's very limited in the advantage it gives you, especially if you run into Russian tanks, because if you run into Russian tanks, it doesn't do you any good, basically. So it's minimal, okay? Because most of the map, of course, like here, as you can see all the circles, most of it is going to be, you know, Rattenkrieg. So Hoth's ability to help early on is kind of minimal, and to help really. So starting the game with him is kind of let's put it that way, in my opinion. Now, on the other hand, if you get this guy to help out at the beginning, booyah, baby. Okay, getting von Richthofen at the beginning is a big help, because every single time that you use one of the air power cards, you get to double the amount of dice that you roll. So instead of 5, you get 10. 10 dice to pummel the enemy with. Now, the downside is you also have to double the rubble modifier. So the rubble modifier for an urban space, instead of +2, it's +4. But for me, that's definitely worth the risk. To have von Richthofen early, especially at the start of the game, and just, you know, pulling those Stukas and those HE-111s and just pound, pound, pound. I mean, it's a big, big help. Especially once you really start to get at it and get into, you know, the thick of it and into the middle of the city, you know, between hexes 7 and 15, which is really where the heart of the fighting is going to go down. Okay. The only thing that's a drawback, well, I should say, let me say one other thing about it. One of the nice things also about having von Richthofen early is it does let you make a lunge for hex 13, which hex 13 is important because that's the only hex where, or I shouldn't, let me step back. It's not the only hex, but is the most important hex where the Russians get 2 units every time they spawn. Now, granted, at each end of the Volga, at 3 and 19, they get 2 also. But because those are vulnerable, those are basically clear terrain, easy to capture, it's not as important as hex 13. Okay, and having von Richthofen early means you can make that lunge after it and try to grab it, which is actually what I did this last game. However, the one drawback is if the Soviets end up playing an anti-aircraft card, then that really stings because you're like, yes, I got 10 dice, yes, ah! Okay, it's just kind of like, it's like, oh man, what the, you know. So having Richthofen, to me, is one of the best things you can do at the beginning of the game as the Germans. To me, it's even better in some ways than having Paulus, because that just makes all those air cards so much more valuable and so much more potent, especially when you're trying to pound in against a heavily fortified Soviet position. Okay? So that's von Richthofen there. Now, the fourth advantage you can start with, if you play the designer's way, is Linden. Now, Linden is connected to the Pioneers. Now, his basic thing is that you start the game with him, you're going to be able to play more than one Pioneer card at a time, and perhaps even more importantly in some respects, if you get this one, which is the Elite Pioneer unit, you can see there's Linden's picture there to remind you that you can't use this unless you have him actually in play. You know, that can be potent, but that is dependent on whether you pull those Pioneer cards or not. And there's not as many of them as there are other types of cards. So to me, this is one of the weakest things that you can get as a starting advantage. It does kind of boil down to fate and timing. You know, as Napoleon said, timing is everything. And if you end up getting in a good situation where, hey, you know, the first couple cards I pull when I capture the spawning hexes at 3 and 19, because quite frankly, that's my standard strategy. I go right after the edges and then I start working my way in. You know, if you pull a bunch of Pioneer cards, and it's like, dude, awesome, okay? But if not, then it's kind of like, he's nice to have, but I'd rather have one of those other starting advantages. Now, one of the other starting advantages for the Germans is to begin with the OKH card. Now, I have to admit, every time I pull this guy, whether it's at the beginning of the game or later on in the game, my Pittsburgh roots come out, because the first thing I think of myself is, uh-oh, here comes that jag-off with a briefcase. Because, of course, this guy is the guy coming to say, oh, by the way, there's been a change in plans. You don't need just the spawning hexes. You got to capture all the hexes along the Volga. That is the orders from on high. And you're just like, dude, what the... You know, and it's like YGBKM. You gotta be kidding me. So to have it at the beginning, at least let you know what the score is. You know, I mean, it's better to know going in right off the bat that you're like, man, I gotta secure the whole river bank. You know, you feel like that guy on the old Alka-Seltzer commercial. I can't believe I ate the whole thing. Well, at least you know it ahead of time, okay? Rather than him lurking in the deck and you'd be like, you know, again, Pittsburgh roots being like, hey, did you see that jag off anywhere? Well, he's in there somewhere. You know, and it does increase the tension, I will say that. But it increases the difficulty significantly if you start the game with this. Because then right away, you know, you got to get them all. You know, and that makes things extremely tough. So that's why I say that this guy is an advantage. Because he's not really. Oh, wait a minute, can I do that with both fingers? Hold on a second, let me see real quick. Can I make this work? Advantage. Yeah, it did work. Okay. And the last one, there's not a card for it, so I'll have to use his Uberblock. Is the commander of the 6th Panzer Division. Okay? Erhard Raus. Now, the nice thing about him is, when you start the game with him, as soon as you empty out the reinforcement box, the 6th row, completely, you get the 6th Panzer, which can be important if it comes out the way, I should say in a timely manner, because then, of course, you can use these elite guys to slam into and hammer one of these hexes that, you know, is at the end or at a critical moment, that kind of thing, to have that extra firepower around. Now, again, this is kind of like Linden in that it's very heavily dependent on fate and timing, because if you're rolling on the German reinforcement track, and if you don't remember the German reinforcement track, let me just move it here real quick. You basically roll each time, and then depending on what numbers you roll, you take those forces off. So you can see here, I rolled quite a few 5s and a decent amount of all the other ones. But in order to get the 6th Panzer, you have to empty out this whole thing, and then you can see Rouse's picture here. So again, that's very dependent on fate, so to speak, to be able to have that available. But again, you know, it's good. But again, you are also tempting fate, because if you call out reinforcements so often, not only are you risking the chance of, you know, here he comes, okay, but you're also risking the chance of losing these units, which are some of your best units in the game. They're being withdrawn. So, of these 6 starting elements for the Germans, Rouse is definitely the most double-edged, and the one that you have to handle kind of like, you know, like in The Godfather, when, you know, the Godfather is thinking about Luca Brasi and saying that man had to be handled by like dynamite, but then he kind of shrugs himself and says, well, dynamite can be exploded harmlessly if need be, you know, kind of thing. So, okay, so that is the German starting 6, so to speak. Now, for the Soviet Union, let's talk about the Soviets. Alright, for the Soviets, there's a couple things you can start with here. So let's start at the beginning with Chuikov. Chuikov, the commander of the 62nd Army in Stalingrad. You can get him right off the bat. Now, the good news is, that means that the Russians, well, the good news for the Russians is they have opportunity fire right off the bat, which lets all those Russian units get an extra crack at your men and wear you down. The bad news is that you will know where Chuikov is, because his block gets deployed somewhere along the Volga. In my last game here, he actually was up here in Hex 15, so I made a big effort to get into there, because that opportunity fire, it may not seem like much at first, you know, single fire, okay, big deal. But when you combine it with, say, the Khrushchev card, which we're about to talk about here in a minute, that can be downright deadly and lethal. So, knowing where Chuikov is a big advantage, because you can knock him out. But it's a big advantage for the Russians to have him from the get-go, because then they have that opportunity fire from the get-go, and then you've got some serious issues going on there. Okay. However, if Chuikov doesn't come out at the beginning, the advantage there is that when he does come out during the regular game, you don't put his block on the map, so you have no idea where the heck he is. Okay. So this can be a big problem for the Germans early on, and you have to be careful, because a couple games ago I got fixated. You know, that block was sitting out there, and it was just taunting me. And Chuikov's like, nee, 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 come get me. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm coming to get you. And, yeah, I kept, well, kind of like the Germans with Stalingrad, I kept pouring in men to try and capture that hex and get Chuikov, and I never did, and I lost the game. Okay, so this can be a major problem for the German player if it comes out early, especially if it ends up on one of the spawning hexes, especially hex 13 or hex 7. You know, that can be really difficult to get to. Okay, all right. The second one, speaking of Khrushchev, Premier Nikita Khrushchev, or future Premier Nikita Khrushchev. He is a big advantage in this game because he gives you +1 to all the firing on the Russian blocks. So basically then when you're doing double fire, which is a 5 or a 6, now you can hit on a 4, 5, or 6. So again, having him at the beginning, especially in combination with Chuikov, you can get some serious German losses piled up fast if you're not careful. Now the flip side, of course, is that Khrushchev, if the unit rolls a 1, they lose a step instantly. Not later, instantly, right off the bat. So it is a double-edged sword for the Russians, but I also like the card because it represents well, I think, you know, the whole attitude and situation, because, you know, it kind of spurs people on, you know, spurred the Russians on to fight harder and stuff, but having that political commissar there also spurred them on to do some basically kind of suicidal, nutso things, and got a lot of people killed in the process. So the Khrushchev card early can be a major issue for the solo player. And of course, keep in mind, all of this I'm talking about solo player, because you can play this 2-player and 3-player too. But I always, of course, play solo because, as you all know, I'm mostly a solo gamer. So the Khrushchev card early can be very devastating, especially combined with Chvikov. Alright. Another Russian opening setup can be to have Zaitsev, one of the most famous, if not the most famous, sniper of World War II, especially the most famous on the Eastern Front. The Zaitsev card coming out early basically means every time the Russians play a sniper card, they get 2 hits instead of 1. Now, at first that might be like, okay, big deal, so the sniper card 2 hits. But you know what, man? That starts to sting, man. You know, you start to do the math on that, and how many hold on a second, let me see how many Russian sniper cards there are in the entire deck. There are 5. So just stop and think about that. 10 hits, I mean, that's an extra block, basically, you know. And again, on a timely battle, when you're trying to maximize your damage, you're taking those losses, especially off those stronger units, you know, that can be tough. And there really is no disadvantage for the Russians having him out early. If anything, it's a total advantage for him to not be in the deck, because you can't kill him, you can't get rid of him. You know, he's just always there. And it can be, again, first it doesn't seem like much, but after you play the game for a while, yeah, this man, look at that face, because he will haunt your dreams. Now, another early advantage for the Russians is to have their Marine units empowered, okay, which basically means when they're deployed, they're always at maximum strength. Now, that can, again, depending on timing, this is another timing issue here. You know, the Marines start up here in this top box here in the middle, and they can land along the Volga with the Volga River Flotilla card. But again, it's very much a timing thing, like Linden or like Rouse, because if they land at a critical spot or near an important part, having that maximum strength can be very important. So it is very much a timing is everything kind of thing with that. So that can be important for the Russians. Okay. Now the 5th one is actually the one that's the most difficult for the Russians to deal with, is the division's late deployment. So basically what happens there is most of the powerful, let me find one, here we go. Most of the powerful Russian 4-step blocks like this actually go into the reinforcement pool right off the bat, together with all the guard units. Now usually, normal circumstances, you randomly mix and pull from the pool who's going to be mixed in with the 4 guard units. But when this happens, basically it's like, you know, the Russians got, you know, caught, you know, flat-footed, be like, oh shoot, man. And they're scrambling to get troops in there and stuff. So at the beginning for the Germans, it can be really good because you're like, dude, you know what, all these initial units that come down here on the map with like these kind of blocks and stuff, okay, like here you can see the initial deployment ones, you know they're going to be weak. So it's like, dude, I don't have to spend, even a deliberate attack, I don't have to spend any cards. What for? I know these guys are going to be weak. I know there's nothing there. Okay, it's kind of like, well, you know, it's kind of like the end of the first day at Gettysburg. You know, when the Confederates had the chance to grab, I believe it was Culp's Hill, if I remember correctly, because they didn't, maybe actually it was even one of the Round Tops, or maybe both. But anyway, I know one of those critical hills they had a chance to grab because basically it's like, you know, there was nobody there. It's kind of like that at the beginning here when you get this late deployment, because you know these first blocks on the map, you know that there's not going to be a very strong force there. Oh, there's a couple mixed in, but it's like go, 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 baby. You know, as fast as you know, fast as you can go, 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 go. Put the pedal to the metal. Make like a bread truck and haul buns. You know, kick the tires, light the fires. Any other saying that you want to use. So that one is one that when the Russians get it, it can be lethal. But on the other hand, when you start bringing in all those 4 reinforcements, and they start to load up these spawning hexes, and then they start to create defenses. Like over here, you can see toward the end here where they were creating a barrier here, but I went ahead and fought my way around it. Although there was a number of blocks here that I had to get through. Because if you look there, the two guys that are in the final hex there at the Dzerzhinsky Tractor Works, let me zoom in for you. You can see they both only have one step left. That's it. So that tells you how difficult it was to get into there. Which again, if you have this game and you love this game, I can't say this enough. The Gore-Tex map is worth it. I mean, look at that. This is the Gore-Tex map. Look, you've got two blocks, the rubble marker, the Tractor Works, and the flag, and it all fits in there really nice and comfortable. So, again, just something to think about. You know, if you have the ability to do so, it is worth it. I'm very glad that I added that on as part of my pledge whenever I did the Kickstarter on this. Now, the last thing, speaking of the guards, let me see if I can find one of the guard units here real quick. Ah, bingo. So these are the Soviet Guard units. Okay. Now you can see they got the red stripe there and they got the G. The last Soviet initial deployment kind of setup thing you can have is to have the Immortal Guards, which basically means this. Every time you fight a battle against the guards, if you don't kill them, even if they only have one dot left, at the beginning of the next battle, ta-da! They start at 4 strength again, right off the bat. And that can be brutal. Absolutely brutal. Okay, especially if 2 of them are in the same spot. And again, because they're going to be coming in as reinforcements into the spawning hexes, you know that that's the possibility of that being there. And then, you know, as the Germans, if you lose too many units, you lose the game. You also have to be careful because some of the German units are marked with a special letter, which basically means when they get destroyed, they count as 2 toward that track. So, that, again, this is one that is very much a timing kind of thing, but it's also very interesting, and it can be potentially a huge stumbling block for the Germans. Okay, so those are the 6 on each side. If you want to look at the list again and review it, you can go back to the beginning of the video there and pause it because I did show it on the screen. Okay, last thing I want to talk about here with this video, and then we'll wrap this video up. And again, I know I keep telling you that the next time I want to see you guys is going to be Oscreet. Well, Oscreet is supposed to be released next Friday. That's the good news. But I keep coming up with ideas, and I guess one of the things that I'd like feedback on, so please put it in the comments, is whether you like this kind of video or not. If not, if you just you really like the reviews and the playthroughs and stuff, which of course is my bread and butter, so to speak, my meat and potatoes, if you will, that's fine. But I just thought I would try this because I do enjoy this game a lot. I think it is a rather underrated game. Which leads me to the last part of this. A couple of general points that I'd like to make concerning the game, and then we'll wrap this up. Okay. First of all, there's been a lot of discussion about the AI and how it works. As far as spawning new units, and especially the movement thing. Okay. And one of the big things is if a move is not possible, like for example, let's zoom in on, and let's just go in here and zoom in on hex number 9. Okay, if a move is not possible, okay, like if you roll a 1 or you roll a 6, and the unit seems to throw itself into the Volga, which is an absurd concept, by the way. What's really going on there with the AI is that it's not that the units are like jumping into the river or anything like that. What basically that is supposed to simulate is the decision by Stavka to not send those resources to hex number 9, but to send them to the flanks to prepare for the big counterattack, Operation Uranus. Okay, and to me, actually, it works very well. The AI does a good job of representing the Russian mentality for this battle. Now, if you're looking for like a 2-player game where, you have more input, you have more, opportunity to change history and stuff, then yeah, this is not going to be the kind of AI for you. But from a historical standpoint, where the Russians were just trying to wear the Germans down, trying to suck them in, sap them completely, just savagely fight, the War of the Rats, the Rattenkrieg, then this AI works just fine. Okay, because again, they will throw blocks in your way. On occasion, they will launch a counterattack. Sometimes when you least expect it. and sometimes it will do crazy things. Okay, sometimes it will do things like move off in the other direction. But you know, war is full of that kind of stuff. Okay, you know, like so you get bad intel. Hey, you know what? Psh, don't worry about those guys. We beat the living snot out of them. They're not a threat anymore. Go ahead and move your guys over to the opposite direction. Well, guess what? You got bad intel because my boys are just fine and we're coming to get you. So, I guess the thing is that as far as the situation goes, as far as representing what the Soviet approach to the battle was, I think the AI does a fine job of that. I don't see the problem. I don't see the issue. And again, I mean, if you're looking for something to think, to, you know, play with history and alter things, then yeah, that's true. This AI does not do that. But what it does do is it represents the Soviet approach very well, in my opinion, and does a nice job with that. Another thing that's been pointed out by some folks is, and let me just go ahead and show you here because it's a prime example, so we'll slide over here a little bit. You know, sometimes it's like, well, you know what, the initial blocks, they don't go anywhere. So okay, there's 3 there in the foreground, okay? And yeah, they have not moved at all since the start of the game. That's true. They haven't. And granted, a human player would be like, dude, maybe I should pull them back to the river and stuff. But again, personally myself, I don't have a problem with them for the following reasons. First of all, because you can't make any kind of move without having to make a hasty attack if you move next to a Soviet unit, they really do hinder things. They kind of funnel things. So, yeah, they're there, and maybe they're not doing a whole lot, but you kind of have to take them into consideration every time. Again, it's kind of like the Soviets using, and I wish I could remember the Russian word for these little ravines and stuff that ran crisscross through this whole area. But the Russians used those to move troops around, to launch, you know, quick little surprise attacks and stuff. So to me, that's what this represents. You know, it's not that they're not moving anywhere and stuff, but these are units that, you know, are supposed to be a hindrance, you know. And battles are not always just, you know, they're not one continuous line of front either. You know, entire campaign is not necessarily like that either. You know, there's a fluidity at times to situations. And I think this does a good job of representing that fluidity because units are going to be moving around. And again, you know, if you're this unit over here and your political commissar said, Comrade Stalin says we are to stay here. And, you know, if you're like the commander of the unit going, Comrade, shouldn't we head back to the river to kind of maybe dig in and help? You know, yet is ordered from Comrade Stalin, we stay here, hold position, and catch Germans when they show up. We hit them in flank, hit them from behind. Okay, well, yeah, are you really going to defy the Commissar? You know, I mean, you're really anxious to see what the Gulag looks like, or worse yet, end up in one of those penal battalions where you had to walk through the minefield, and if you made it through the minefield, congratulations, you get to go back to unit. But if you don't, well, you found mine. Good job. You know, I mean, are you really going to defy that? So to me, yeah, some of the blocks aren't moving. It does seem a little bit odd. But they do serve a purpose in the overall structure of the game and how the game is set up. Because they do slow things down. They do make things difficult. And you do have to take them into consideration when you move. Okay? So, again, that's something I just don't have a problem with. I don't see it as being an issue. And I guess the last thing I'll address about this is there's been some criticism about, you know, there's no historical schedule reinforcements, so, you know, having the reinforcements come in randomly, you know, what's the point? Well, to me, the point is this. This game, to me, is not supposed to be a game of the Battle of Stalingrad. It's supposed to be a game of the Battle of Stalingrad. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's put it this way. It's kind of like the game that also came out in 2018, Cataclysm, where Cataclysm, it says on the front of the box, a Second World War. Not the Second World War, So it's not going to necessarily flow the same way. It doesn't even start in 1939 with the same circumstances. It is a game of the Second World War because you never know what it's going to be set up like. You never know what route it's going to take. Okay? And the same thing here. Initially, the Germans, the whole point of Stalingrad wasn't supposed to be important. Stalingrad was just supposed to be a take it on the fly, grab it as quick as you can, if you can, okay, and basically protect the flank of Army Group A, which is going after the oil fields. That was the key. That was the prize. But then, Hitler changed his mind. He got fixated on it. And again, I did the same thing with Tweakov a couple games ago. It's very easy to fall into that trap. So, basically, I guess what I'm saying is that with these reinforcements and stuff, you're put in the position here of a commander and basically being like, look, this is what you have to work with. This is what the mission objective is. Just knock out Stalingrad as a functioning enemy bastion. And then secure that flank by, of course, then having the Volga, reaching the Volga, and of course the Volga, one of the most formidable rivers in Europe, and using it to protect your flank. And that way Army Group A can move and not have to worry about being harassed. And this is what you had to do it with. And, in that sort of situation, when the whole thing was getting rolling, if it's a battle, then, you don't know exactly what reinforcements you might have coming in. You don't know what might be made available to you right off the bat, or who's being refitted, or who just, had a really tough fight the last time around and needs, a bit of pullback time and kind of, not necessarily completely R&R, but, just needs a breather, on things. So, to me, this is very wide open. And this, again, it's not, this is definitely not Turning Point Stalingrad. It's not with a detailed order of battle and pounding on each other and stuff. This is much more fluid. This, especially at the beginning, but then it does get grinding. You have to use those cards and you have to fight your way through and battle your way through. And, if you make rubble, Lord have mercy, because then it takes you 2 hits just to inflict 1 step of damage. But again, it's supposed to be a battle of Stalingrad, not the battle. Okay? And again, the same thing with going through the cards, the deck. The cards are a timer. The cards basically reflect the buildup of the Soviet forces until they were ready to unleash Operation Uranus. And then, of course, when the deck runs out, there's no Soviet cards left. If you don't have the city secured, or neutralized by getting the spawning hexes, if you don't get the OKH card and have to get all the riverbank hexes, then, if you haven't done that by the time the last card comes out, well, then as the Germans, basically it really is, it'll be Uranus. I mean, bottom line. So anyway, just kind of some observations, some thoughts, a little bit of discussion about the different options that you can start the game with. Because again, I will freely admit this. This is not a cheap game. This will cost you a pretty penny. It is an investment. So you do need to be sure that this is the kind of game for you. Which of course is why I did my playthrough video before I did my review video, and quite frankly why I decided to do this video, because it gives you a little more in-depth analysis of it, and you can look at some of these starting options and be like, oh, will that make the game interesting and fun? Will it really add to the replay value? Or when you're looking at some of this stuff that I've been talking about, if you're like, psh, man, what? Nah, I don't know about that. And maybe maybe it is a little too far-fetched for you. And that's fine. That's cool. That's not a problem. But it doesn't mean that the game is bad or broken. It just means that it's not for you. Cataclysm is not for everybody. It's kind of, to me, it's the ultimate sandbox World War II game. But it's not everybody's cup of tea. If you're like, psh, that wouldn't happen. This couldn't happen. Yeah, well, I'm sure the day after the Nazi-Soviet pact was announced, there's probably a lot of people being like, wait a minute, this has got to be some kind of hoax. No, they didn't know. How could, no, they couldn't have done, no, somebody's pulling your chain, somebody yanking your chain. No, it happened, okay? Sometimes the most bizarre things. Miracle of the House of Brandenburg. When all of a sudden the the Tsar, Peter, great admirer of Frederick, and the next thing you know, the Russians are helping old Frederick out. It's like, who could predict that? Well, nobody. Okay? And that's part of the thing with history. Sometimes I think, and this is just my personal opinion, but sometimes I think that we as wargamers, we kind of forget that we have this, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent advantage in games that, did not exist in history. That neither side had. Well, okay, unless you were McClellan with the Lost Orders and stuff, at the Battle of Antietam. I mean, that was... still can't figure out... Well, I take that back. I know why he didn't take advantage of it, but talk about being handed things on a silver platter. You know how many generals in history would have killed for that opportunity? Literally? Anyway, my point being that I sometimes think that we fall into that trap of being like, we have so much information and we see so many things that just weren't available. And it's like anytime anything wants to throw a monkey wrench into that, it just like, it feels like sometimes I think that what happens is some people like start to feel like they're going to lose their minds. Like, there's too many birds on their antenna, or they're fruit fries short of a Happy Meal all of a sudden, and I just don't think that, to me, that is, something that we have to kind of remember and step back from at times, because, there's lots of fog of war, there's lots of friction and stuff, and there's just, you can only do so much with this. Even an umpired game, you still can only do so much. So, it's kind of like people who don't like luck in their games. I honestly, and it's fine if they want to, but I will say for myself, I will never understand that, because life is full of luck and chance and synchronicity, and it's just sometimes it's ridiculous, what can happen when you're in the right place at the right time, or conversely in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay, so a little bit of analysis, thoughts, musings about Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga. All right, next time, and I'm starting to feel more confident about this now. Here, wait, let me zoom out. Next time should be in the operative word, should be Oskreek. Once I get a chance to get my hands on it, I'll do an unboxing, and then I'll do a playthrough as soon as I feel comfortable with the rolls. So, hopefully you enjoyed this in-depth analysis of Stalingrad Inferno on the Volga. So this is Tim Korshner from Bare Bones Wargaming saying thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time more than likely from the Eastern Front, unless by some miracle Admiral's War gets here first, which I didn't kickstart. I thought about it and I didn't, but I did pre-order it, so I'm waiting. But I know they're doing all the Kickstarter ones first, which of course makes sense, because those folks backed it on Kickstarter. But I'm still waiting for my pre-order copy. So if that by some miracle should show up first, I'll probably take a look at that and talk about that first. Otherwise, Ostkrieg it is. So as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.